speech. Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. It's time to start. Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. It is time to start. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. It's time to start. It's time to start. The seventh plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Not moving. Okay. Before proceeding to the general debate, the General Assembly will hear an introduction by the Secretary General of his annual report on the work of the organization, issued as document A/79/1 under agenda item 111 in accordance with resolution 51/241. I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our world is in a whirlwind. We are in an era of epic transformation, facing challenges unlike any we have ever seen, challenges that demand global solutions. Yet, geopolitical divisions keep deepening. The planet keeps heating. Wars rage with no clue how they will end. And nuclear posturing and new weapons cast a dark shadow. We are edging towards the unimaginable, a power keg that risks engulfing the world. Meanwhile, 2024 is the year that half of humanity goes to the polls, and half of humanity will be affected. I stand before you in this whirlwind, convinced of two overriding truths. First, the state of our world is unsustainable. We can't go on like this. And second, the challenges we face are solvable. But that requires us to make sure the mechanisms of international problem solving actually solve problems. The Summit of the Future was a first step, but we have a long way to go. And getting there requires confronting three major drivers of unsustainability. A world of impunity, where violations and abuses threaten the very foundation of international law and UN Charter. A world of inequality, where injustices and grievances threaten to undermine countries or even push them over the edge. And a world of uncertainty, where unmanaged global risks threaten our future in unknowable ways. These worlds of impunity, inequality, and uncertainty are connected and colliding. Excellencies, the level of impunity in the world is politically indefensible and morally intolerable. Today, a growing number of governments and others feel entitled to get out of jail free card. They can trample international law. They can violate the United Nations Charter. They can turn a blind eye to international human rights conventions or the decisions of international courts. They can thumb their nose at international humanitarian law. They can invade another country, lay waste to whole societies, or utterly disregard the welfare of their own people. And nothing will happen. We see this age of impunity everywhere, in the Middle East, in the heart of Europe, in the Horn of Africa, and beyond. The war in Ukraine is spreading with no signs of letting up. Civilians are paying the price in rising death tolls and shattered lives and communities. It is time for a just peace based on the UN Charter, on international law, and on UN resolutions. Meanwhile, Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Let's be clear. Nothing can justify the abhorrent acts of terror committed by Hamas on October 7th or the taking of hostages, both of which I have repeatedly condemned. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The speed and scale of the The speed and scale of the killing and destruction in Gaza are unlike anything in my years as Secretary General. More than 200 of our own staff have been killed, many with their families. And yet, the women and men of the United Nations continue to deliver humanitarian aid. And I know you join me in paying a special tribute to UNRWA and to all humanitarians in Gaza. The international community must mobilize for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and the beginning of an irreversible process towards a two-state solution. For those who go on undermining that goal with more settlements, more land grabs, more incitement, I ask, what is the alternative? How could the world accept a one state in which a large number of Palestinians would be included without any freedom, any rights, or dignity? In Sudan, a brutal power struggle has unleashed horrific violence, including widespread rape and sexual assaults. A humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding as famine spreads. Yet outside powers continue to interfere with no unified approach to finding peace. In the Sahel, the dramatic and rapid expansion of the terrorist threat requires a joint approach rooted in solidarity, but regional and international cooperation have broken down. From Myanmar to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to Haiti, to Yemen and beyond, we continue to see appalling levels of violence and human suffering in the face of a chronic failure to find solutions. Meanwhile, our peacekeeping missions are too often operating in areas where simply there is no peace to keep. Instability in many places around the world is a byproduct of instability in power relations and geopolitical divides. For all its perils, the Cold War had rules. There were hotlines, red lines, and guardrails. It can feel as though we don't have that today, and nor do we have a unipolar world. We are moving to a multipolar world, but we are not yet there yet. We are in a purgatory of polarity. And in this purgatory, more and more countries are filling the spaces of geopolitical divides, doing whatever they want with no accountability. That is why it is more important than ever to reaffirm the Charter, to respect international law, to support and implement decisions of international courts, and to reinforce human rights in the world, anywhere and everywhere.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, rising inequalities are a second driver of unsustainability and a stain on our collective conscience. Inequality is not a technical or bureaucratic issue. At its heart, inequality is a question of power with historic roots. Conflict, climate upheaval, and the cost of living crisis are pushing those roots even deeper. At the same time, the world has not recovered from the surge in inequalities caused by the pandemic. Of the world's poorest 75 countries, 1/3 are worse off today than they were 5 years ago. During that same period, the 5 richest men in the world have more than doubled their wealth. And the top 1% of people on Earth own 43% of all global financial assets. At the national level, some governments are supercharging inequalities by doling out massive tax giveaways to corporations and the ultra-rich, while shortchanging investments in health, education, and social protection. No one is being more shortchanged than the world's women and girls. Excellencies, rampant gender-based discrimination and abuse are the most prevalent inequality across all societies. Every day, it seems that we are confronted by yet more sickening cases of femicide, gender-based violence, and mass rape, both in peacetime and as a weapon of war. In some countries, laws are being used to threaten reproductive health and rights. And in Afghanistan, laws are being used to lock in the systematic oppression of women and girls. And I am sorry to observe that despite years of talk, gender inequality is on full display. Please forgive me, it's on full display in this hall as well. Less than 10% of speakers during this week's general debate are women. This is unacceptable, especially when we know that gender equality delivers for peace, sustainable development, climate action, and much more. That is precisely why we took targeted measures to achieve gender parity among the United Nations senior leadership. This is a goal that we have already achieved. It's doable. I call on male-dominated political and economic establishments around the world to do it as well. Excellencies, global inequalities are reflected and reinforced even in our own global institutions. The United Nations Security Council was designed by the victors of the Second World War. At the time, most of the African continent was still under colonial domination. To this day, Africa has no permanent seat on the world's preeminent Council of Peace. This must change. So must the global financial architecture set up 80 years ago. I commend the leaders of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund for taking the important steps that they have. But, as the Pact for the Future emphasizes, tackling inequalities requires accelerating reform of the international financial architecture. Over the past 8 decades, the global economy has grown and transformed. The Bretton Woods institutions have not kept pace. They can no longer provide a global safety net or offer developing countries the level of support that they need. In the world's poorest countries, the debt interest payments now cost more on average than investments in education, health, and infrastructure combined. And around the world, more than 80% of Sustainable Development Goal targets are off track. Excellencies, getting back on track requires a surge of financing for the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. That means that G20 countries need to lead on an SDG stimulus of $500 billion a year. It means reforms to substantially increase the lending capacity of multilateral development banks and to enable them to massively scale up affordable long-term climate and development finance. It means expanding contingency financing through recycling of special drawing rights. And it means promoting long-term debt restructuring. Excellencies, I have no illusions about the obstacles to reform of the multilateral system. Those with political and economic power, or those who believe they have that power, are always reluctant to change. But the status quo is already draining their power. Without reform, fragmentation is inevitable, and global institutions will become less legitimate, less credible, and less effective.
Excellencies, the third driver of our unsustainable world is uncertainty. The ground is shifting under our feet. Anxiety levels are off the charts, and young people in particular are counting on us and seeking solutions. Uncertainty is compounded by 2 existential threats: the climate crisis and the rapid advance of technology, in particular artificial intelligence. Excellencies, we are in a climate meltdown. Extreme temperatures, raging fires, droughts, and epic floods are not natural disasters. They are human disasters, increasingly fueled by fossil fuels. No country is spared. But the poorest and most vulnerable are hardest hit. Climate hazards are blowing a hole through the budgets of many African countries, costing up to 5% of GDP every year. And this is just the start. we are on course to careen past the global limit of a 1.5 degree temperature rise. But as the problem gets worse, solutions are getting better. Renewable prices are plummeting, rollout is accelerating, and lives are being transformed by affordable, accessible, clean energy. Renewables don't just generate power, they generate jobs, wealth, energy security, and a path out of poverty for millions. But developing countries cannot be plundered in that journey. Our panel on critical minerals has recommended fair and sustainable ways to meet global demand for these resources which are essential to the renewables revolution. Excellencies, a future without fossil fuel is certain. A fair and fast transition is not. That is in your hands. By next year, every country must produce an ambitious new national climate action plan or national determined contributions. And this must bring national energy strategies, sustainable development priorities, and climate ambitions together. They must align with 1.5 degree limit, cover the whole economy, and contribute to every one of the COP28 energy transition targets. An International Energy Agency report released today breaks this down. By 2035, on average, advanced economies must slash energy emissions 80% and the emerging markets 65%. The G20 is responsible for 80% of total emissions. They must lead the charge, keeping with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. But these must be done with a joint effort, pooling resources, scientific capacities, and proven and affordable technologies for all to be able to reach those targets. I'm honored to be working closely with President Lula of Brazil, who is both G20 chair and COP30 host, to secure maximum ambition, acceleration, and cooperation. We just met for that purpose. Finance is essential. COP29 is around the corner. It must deliver a significant new finance goal. And we also need a loss and damage fund that meets the scale of the challenge and developed countries meeting their adaptation finance promises. And we must finally flip the script on a crazy situation. We continue to reward polluters to wreck our planet. The fossil fuel industry continues to pocket massive profits and subsidies, while everyday people bear the costs of climate catastrophe, from rising insurance premiums to lost livelihoods. I call on G20 countries to shift money from fossil fuel subsidies and investments to a just energy transition, to put an effective price on carbon, and to implement new and innovative sources of financing, including solidarity levies on fossil fuel extraction through legally binding, transparent mechanisms. All by next year, and this taking into account that those who shoulder the blame must foot the bill. Polluters must pay. Excellencies, the rapid rise of new technologies poses another unpredictable existential risk. Artificial intelligence will change virtually everything we know, from work, education, and communication to culture and politics. We know AI is rapidly advancing, but where is it taking us? To more freedom or more conflict? To a more sustainable world or greater inequality? To being better informed or easier to manipulate? A handful of companies and even individuals have already amassed enormous power over the development of AI with little accountability or oversight for the moment. Without a global approach to its management, artificial intelligence could lead to artificial divisions across the board. A great fracture to internets, to markets, to economies, with every country forced to pick a side and enormous consequences for all. The United Nations is the universal platform for dialogue and consensus. It is uniquely placed to promote cooperation on AI based on the values of the Charter and international law. The global debate happens here, or it does not happen. And I welcome important first steps. 2 resolutions in the General Assembly, the Global Digital Compact, and the recommendations of the high-level body on AI can lay the foundations for inclusive governance of AI. Let's move forward together to make AI a force for good. Excellencies, nothing lasts forever. But a feature of human life is that it appears otherwise. The current order always feels fixed until it is not. Across human history, we see empires rising and falling, old certainties crumbling, tectonic shifts in global affairs. Today, our course is unsustainable. It is in all our interests to manage the epic transformations underway, to choose the future we want, and to guide our world towards it. Many have said that the divisions and differences today are just too great, that it is impossible for us to come together for the common good. You proved that is not true. The Summit of the Future showed that with a spirit of dialogue and compromise, we can join forces to steer our world to a more sustainable path. It is not the end. It is the start of a journey, a compass in the whirlwind. Let's keep going. Let's move our world towards less impunity and more accountability, less inequality and more justice, less uncertainty and more opportunity. The people of the world are looking to us, and succeeding generations will look back on us. Let them find us on the side of the United Nations Charter, on the side of our shared values and principles, and on the right side of history. And I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General. The Assembly will now turn to agenda item 8, entitled General Debate. Excellencies, heads of state and government, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I extend a heartfelt welcome to the delegations from member states, observers, and esteemed guests. It is my profound honor and privilege to welcome you to this august hall for the general debate of the 79th session of the General Assembly. Before I proceed, I would like to recognize the presence here today of 9 of my predecessors, past presidents of the General Assembly. Although barely 2 weeks in the job, I can already appreciate the challenges they navigated through. The general debate remains one of the world's most inclusive, representative, and authoritative platforms for global reflection and collective action. This year, the urgency of our task cannot be overstated. We are falling behind in our pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. I am informed that with just 5 years to go, less than 18% of the goals have been achieved. Also, the climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is here now, ravaging ecosystems and dismantling the livelihoods of entire communities. Conflicts rage from the Middle East to Ukraine, from Haiti to South Sudan, leaving in their wake death, destruction, and immense suffering. I call for an immediate ceasefire in all these conflict settings. For almost a year now, the people of Gaza and Israel have been caught in a spiraling cycle of conflict and retribution. I take this opportunity to call for an immediate ceasefire for the Hamas-Israel war, the unconditional release of hostages, and for all parties to abide by international law, including international humanitarian law, and work towards a just and lasting solution grounded in the United Nations Charter, relevant resolutions, and international law ensuring dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. Indeed, only a two-state solution can end the cycle of violence and instability, ensuring peace, security, and dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. Excellencies, we should be coming together for peace and the well-being of our citizens. We should not divert essential resources into military stockpiles, fueling an arms race never before seen since the Cold War era. Nuclear weapons continue to be a threat to humanity and to our planet. A nuclear war must never be fought. Conditions for their use or accidental explosion must always be avoided. We call for urgent measures for the abolition of these tools of the annihilation of the human race and our environment. Old hatreds rooted in prejudice and ignorance persist, and new divisions arise where none should exist. In the recent past, mistrust among states has grown steadily, complicating prospects for peaceful settlement of interstate disputes. It is time to invest more in building trust and practicing dialogue. Constant dialogue is a powerful weapon for all governments have in their hands. Trust and dialogue are integral parts of our human dignity and precondition for lasting peace and security. Excellencies, gender equality remains a distant goal as many women and girls around the world continue to be denied their basic rights, justice, and opportunities. Globally, we witness a troubling regression in the protection of human rights and human dignity. Millions remain trapped in poverty, their lives restricted by forces beyond their control. Forced labor and modern slavery, extending even to young boys and girls of school age, are an insult to human dignity. They must be combated in every society at all times. Excellencies, there is an urgent need to reform the international financial system as too many countries remain burdened by crippling debt, forced to choose between servicing loans and improving the lives of their citizens. Meanwhile, the digital divide continues to widen, cutting off entire populations from the tools needed to succeed in the 21st century. Excellencies, we are not mere spectators of these crises, nor are we powerless to act. Within this hall are the leaders and representatives of the world's nations, the very people with the authority and responsibility to shape the course of our shared future. At our disposal is one of the most powerful tools for positive change: international cooperation grounded in the undeniable truth that even the most powerful nation cannot solve these complex borderless challenges alone. This truth was reaffirmed through our efforts at the Summit of the Future and the consensus adoption of the Pact of the Future. The Pact of the Future charts a path forward, reinvigorating our multilateral institutions with renewed energy, focus, and clarity to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world. Let us build on this momentum. Excellencies, a better world begins with unlocking the potential of we, the peoples of the world. Freedom and good governance ensure that no one, no individual, no community is left behind. In this endeavor, we must never overlook the challenges faced by the small island developing states, the landlocked developing states, the least developing countries, and the small states. It is incumbent on the United Nations to do more than just express solidarity. Specific programs responding to the unique situations in which these groups of states find themselves must be envisaged. This will be a priority of my presidency. Africa is one of the priorities of the United Nations. We must support Africa. The African Union's Agenda 2063 presents a bold and transformative vision for the continent. Africa currently has the youngest population in the world, and by 2063, 1 in 4 people will be African. The generation of resources for the well-being of these peoples has been much slower than the population growth. We must not let Africa's potential go unrealized. In fact, to truly unlock Africa's vast potential, we must actively cultivate global partnerships that align with the continent's aspirations and drive its success. In this endeavor, I look forward to working with member states of the United Nations this year on keeping Africa at the heart of our agenda. Excellencies, in this 79th session, I also want to prioritize multilingualism as a recognition of our world's cultural and linguistic richness. We understand that the multitude of languages, cultures, and perspectives should not be viewed as a source of division, but as a wellspring of strength. Excellencies, we anticipate a very successful high-level week. In addition to the recently concluded Summit of the Future and this ongoing general debate, several critical high-level events are expected to take place. These include the high-level event on microbial resistance, the high-level meeting on addressing the existential threats posed by sea level rise, and the high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Throughout the 79th session, we will address the urgent issues of our time. While we may not agree on every issue, we all share the same fundamental goal: to build a better world for everyone, everywhere. Here today are representatives from 193 member states, each embodying our collective aspirations, each guided by a shared vision. The path ahead is difficult, fraught with obstacles that may at times seem insurmountable, but they are not impassable. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the collective will to overcome these challenges if we act together with courage and conviction. Thank you. Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind members that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation into other official United Nations languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at previous sessions, namely, that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly Hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. After delivering their statements from the rostrum, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly Hall through room GA 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed in this manner? It is so decided. Finally, I should like to draw the attention of members that during the general debate, official photographs of all the speakers are taken by the Department of Global Communications. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Muito bem. Meus cumprimentos.
My greetings to the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Yang. I would like to greet the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and each of the heads of state and government and delegates present. I'd like to address specifically to the Palestinian delegation who is taking part in this opening session for the first time, a bit as an observer member. I'd like to also mention President Abbas attending this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, the day before yesterday, here in this very plenary, we adopted the Pact for the Future. Its difficult approval shows the weakening of our collective capacity for negotiation and dialogue. Its limited scope is also an expression of the paradox of our time. We walk around in circles between possible commitments that lead to insufficient results. Not even with the tragedy of COVID-19 were we able to unite around a treaty on pandemics at the World Health Organization. We need to go much further and provide the UN with the necessary means to face the dizzying changes in the international panorama. We are living in a time of growing anguish, frustration, tension, and fear. We are witnessing an alarming escalation of geopolitical disputes and strategic rivalries. 2023 holds the sad record of the highest number of conflicts since World War II. Global military spending grew for the 9th consecutive year and reached $2.4 trillion. Over $90 billion have been mobilized with nuclear arsenals. These resources could have been used to finance the fight against hunger and climate change. What we are seeing is an increase in military capabilities. The use of force, not supported by international law, is becoming the rule. We are witnessing two simultaneous conflicts with the potential to become widespread conflagrations. In Ukraine, with regret, we are seeing the war extending without any prospect of peace. Brazil has firmly condemned the invasion of the Ukrainian territory. It is already clear that neither side will be able to achieve all their objectives through military means. The use of increasingly destructive weapons brings to the mind the darkest days of this sterile Cold War confrontation. Creating conditions for resuming direct dialogue between the parties is crucial at this time. This is a message of the 6 points of understanding that China and Brazil offer for a process of dialogue to be established and for the hostilities to end. In Gaza and the West Bank, we are witnessing one of the greatest humanitarian crises in recent history, which is now spreading dangerously to Lebanon. What began as a terrorist action by fanatics against innocent Israeli civilians has become a collective punishment for the entire Palestinian people. There have been over 40,000 fatal victims, mostly women and children. The right to defense has become the right to vengeance, which prevents an agreement for the release of hostages and postpones the ceasefire. Forgotten conflicts in Sudan and Yemen are causing excruciating suffering to nearly 30 million people. This year, the number of people in need of humanitarian aid in the world will reach 300 million. In times of increasing polarization, expressions such as deglobalization and decoupling have become commonplace, but it is impossible to deplanetize our life together. We're doomed to climate change interdependence. The planet is no longer waiting to demand payment for the next generation and is fed up with unfulfilled climate agreements. It is tired of neglected carbon reduction targets and financial aid to poor countries that does not arrive. Denialism succumbs to evidence of global warming. 2024 is on track to be the hottest year in modern history. Hurricanes in the Caribbean, typhoons in Asia, droughts and floods in Africa, torrential rains in Europe leave a trail of death and destruction. In the south of Brazil, we had the biggest flood since 1941. The Amazon is experiencing the worst drought in 45 years. The forest fires have spread across the country and have already devoured 5 million hectares in August alone. My government does not outsource responsibilities, nor does it abdicate its sovereignty. We have done already a lot, but we know that much more needs to be done. In addition to facing the challenge of climate crisis, we're fighting against those who profit with environmental degradation. We will not tolerate environmental crimes, illegal mining, and organized crime. We reduced the deforestation of the Amazon by 50% in the last year, and we will eradicate it by 2030. It is no longer acceptable to think about solutions for tropical forests without listening to the indigenous peoples, traditional communities, and all those that live in them. Our sustainable development vision is based on the potential of the bioeconomy. Brazil will host COP30 in 2025, convinced that multilateralism is the only way to overcome the climate emergency. Our nationally determined contribution, NDC, will be presented later this year, in line with the goal of limiting the increase of the planet's temperature to 1.5 degrees. Brazil stands out as a source of opportunities in this world revolutionized by energy transition. Today, we are one of the countries with the cleanest energy mix. 90% of our electricity comes from renewable sources, such as biomass, hydroelectrical power, solar power, and wind power. We made the choice for biofuels 50 years ago, long before the discussion about alternative energies gained traction. We are on the forefront of other important niches, such as green hydrogen production. It is time to face the debate about the slow pace of the planet's decarbonization and work for an economy less reliant on fossil fuels. Mr. President, Latin America has been experienced since a second lost decade since 2014. The region's average growth during this period was only just 0.9%, less than half of what was seen in the last decade of the 80s. This combination of low growth and high levels of inequality results in harmful effects on the political landscape. Engulfed by disputes often unrelated to the region, our vocation for cooperation and understanding has been weakened. It is unjustified keeping Cuba on a unilateral list of states that allegedly promote terrorism. And also that this is undue, it reaches the most vulnerable countries. In Haiti, it's urgent to combine actions to restore public order and promote development. In Brazil, defending democracy implies impermanent action against extremist, messianic, and totalitarian attacks which spread hatred, intolerance, and resentment. It was on its behalf that Brazilians defeated dictators and tyrants who tried to undermine institutions and put them at the service of reactionary interests. Democracy needs to respond to the legitimate aspiration of those who no longer accept hunger, inequality, unemployment, and violence. In a globalized world, it makes no sense to resort to false patriots and isolationists, nor is there hope in resorting to ultra-liberal experiments that only worsen the difficulties of an impoverished continent. The future of our region depends, above all, on building a sustainable, efficient, and inclusive state that tackles all forms of discrimination. A future which is not intimidated by individuals, corporations, or digital platforms that consider themselves above the law. Freedom is the first victim of a world with no rules. Essential elements of sovereignty includes the right to prescribe laws, adjudicate disputes, and enforce rules within one's territory, including the digital environment. The state we are building is sensitive to the needs of the most vulnerable, without giving up sound macroeconomic foundations. The false opposition between state and market was abandoned by developed nations, which returned to practice active industrial policies and strong regulation of the domestic economy. In the area of artificial intelligence, we are experiencing the consolidation of asymmetries that lead to a true knowledge oligopoly. The unprecedented concentration in the hands of a small number of people and companies based in an even smaller number of countries is advancing. We are interested in emancipatory artificial intelligence, which also has the face of the global south and which strengthens cultural diversity, that respects human rights, protects personal data, and promotes information integrity. And above all, that it will be a tool for peace, not for war. We need an intergovernment governance of artificial intelligence in which all states have a seat. Mr. President, conditions for accessing financial resources remain prohibitive for most low and middle income countries. The debt burden limits fiscal room to invest in health and education, reduce inequalities, and address climate change. African countries borrow at rates up to 8 times higher than Germany and 4 times higher than the United States. It's a Marshall Plan in reverse, in which the poorest finance the richest. Without greater participation of the developing countries in the management of the IMF and the World Bank, there will be no effective change. While the Sustainable Development Goals lag behind, the world's 150 largest companies have collectively made up to $1 trillion in profits over the last 2 years. The fortunes of the top 5 billionaires have more than doubled since the start of this decade, while 60% of humanity has become poor. The super rich pay proportionally much less tax than the working class. To remedy this anomaly, Brazil has insisted on international cooperation to develop minimum global taxation standards. The data released by FAO 2 months ago on the state of food insecurity in the world is shocking. The number of people going hungry around the world has increased by more than 152 million since 2019. This means that 9% of the world's population, 733 million people, are undernourished. The problem is severe in Africa and Asia, but it also persists in parts of Latin America. Women and girls make up the majority of people facing hunger in the world. Pandemics, armed conflicts, climate events, and agricultural subsidies from rich countries are increasing the scope of this scourge. But hunger is not just the result of external factors. It arises above all from political choices. Today, the world produces more than enough food to eradicate it. What is missing is for conditions to be created so that food may be affordable. This is my government's most urgent commitment: end hunger in Brazil, as we did in 2014. In 23 alone, we lifted 24,400,000 people out of a condition of severe food insecurity. The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, which we will launch in Rio de Janeiro in November, was born from this political will and this spirit of solidarity. It will be one of the main results of the Brazilian G20 chairmanship and is open to the world. Anyone who wants to join this collective effort is welcome. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, about to turn 80, the United Nations Charter has never undergone comprehensive reform. Only 4 amendments were passed, all of them between 1965 and 1973. The Charter's current version fails to address some of humanity's most pressing challenges. When the UN was founded, we were 51 countries. We are now 193 countries. Several countries, mainly on the African continent, were under colonial rule when the UN was founded and had no say over its goals and functioning. There is no gender balance in the highest positions. The position of Secretary General has never been held by a woman. We are approaching the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, with the United Nations increasingly empty and paralyzed. It is time to react vigorously to this situation, restoring to the organization the prerogatives that derive from its status as a universal forum. One-off adjustments are not enough. We need to think about reviewing and revising the Charter comprehensively. The reform should include the following goals: transforming the Economic and Social Council into the main forum for dealing with sustainable development and the fight against climate change with a real capacity to inspire financial institutions. Revitalizing the role of the General Assembly, including in matters of international peace and security. Strengthening of the Peace-Building Commission. Reform of the Security Council, focusing on its composition, working methods, and veto powers in order to make it more effective and representative of contemporary realities. Excluding Latin America and Africa from the permanent seats of the Security Council is an unacceptable echo of domination practices from the colonial past. Let's promote this discussion in a transparent way. Let's promote this discussion in a transparent way in consultation with the G77, the G20, and the BRICS, in the CARICOM, at the UE, and any other spaces that exist. I have no illusions about the complexity of a reform like this, which will face crystallized interests in maintaining the status quo. It will require enormous negotiation effort, but that is our responsibility. We cannot wait for another world tragedy like the World War II to only then build a new governance on its rubbles. The will of the majority can persuade those who cling to the raw expression of the mechanisms of power. The humanities' aspirations echo in this plenary. Here, we engage in the world's big debates. In this forum, we look for answers to the problems inflicted on the world. It is up to the General Assembly, the biggest expression of multilateralism, the mission to pave the way for the future. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, say they're checking a few things before he's here, but I think they're checking a few things. I don't know.
Just driving another minute.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
My back. My fellow leaders, today is the fourth time I've had the great honor of speaking to this assembly as President of the United States. It'll be my last. I've seen a remarkable sweep of history. I was first elected to office in the United States of America as a U.S. Senator in 1972. Now, I know I look like I'm only 40. I know that. I was 29 years old. Back then, we were living through an inflection point, a moment of tension and uncertainty. The world was divided by the Cold War. The Middle East was headed toward war. America was at war in Vietnam. At that point, the longest war in America's history. Our country was divided and angry, and there were questions about our staying power and our future. But even then, I entered public life not out of despair, but out of optimism. The United States and the world got through that moment. It wasn't easy or simple without significant setbacks. But we go on to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons through arms control, and then go on to bring the Cold War itself to an end. Israel and Egypt went to war, but then forged a historic peace. We ended the war in Vietnam. The last year in Hanoi, I met with the Vietnamese leadership. We elevated our partnership to the highest level. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for reconciliation. That today the United States and Vietnam are partners and friends, and it's proof that even from the horrors of war, there's a way forward. Things can get better. We should never forget that. I've seen that throughout my career. In the 1980s, I spoke out against apartheid in South Africa, and then I watched the racist regime fall. In the 1990s, I worked to hold Milosevic accountable for war crimes. He was held accountable. At home, I wrote and passed the Violence Against Women Act to end the scourge of violence against women and girls, not only in America, but across the world, as many of you have as well. But we have so much more to do, especially against rape and sexual violence as weapons of war and terror. We were attacked on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We brought him justice. Then I came to the presidency at another moment of crisis and uncertainty. I believed America had to look forward. New challenges, new threats, new opportunities were in front of us. We needed to put ourselves in a position to see the threats, to deal with the challenges, and to seize the opportunities as well. We need to end the era of war that began on 9/11. As Vice President to President Obama, he asked me to work to wind down the military operations in Iraq and we did, painful as it was. When I came to office as president, Afghanistan had replaced Vietnam as America's longest war. I was determined to end it, and I did. It was a hard decision, but the right decision. 4 American presidents had faced that decision, but I was determined not to leave it to the 5th. It was a decision accompanied by tragedy. 13 brave Americans lost their lives, along with hundreds of Afghans in a suicide bomb. I think those lost lives, I think of them every day. I think of all the 2,461 U.S. military deaths over a long 20 years of that war. 20,744 American servicemen wounded in action. I think of their service, their sacrifice, and their heroism. I know other countries lost their own men and women fighting alongside us. We honor their sacrifices as well. To face the future, I was also determined to rebuild my country's alliances and partnerships to a level not previously seen. We did just that, from traditional treaty alliances to new partnerships like the Quad with the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. I know many look at the world today and see difficulties and react with despair, but I do not. I won't. As leaders, we don't have the luxury. I recognize the challenges from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan and beyond. War, hunger, terrorism, brutality, record displacement of people, a climate crisis, democracy at risk, strains within our societies, the promise of artificial intelligence and its significant risk. The list goes on. But maybe because all I've seen and all we have done together over the decades, I have hope. I know there is a way forward. In 1919, the Irish poet William Butler Yeats described a world, and I quote, "where things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world," end of quote. Some may say those words describe the world not just in 1919, but in 2024. But I see a critical distinction. In our time, the center has held. Leaders and people from every region and across the political spectrum have stood together, turned the page. We turned the page on the worst pandemic in a century. We made sure COVID no longer controls our lives. We defended the UN Charter and ensured the survival of Ukraine as a free nation. My country made the largest investment in climate, clean energy, ever anywhere in history. There will always be forces that pull our countries apart and the world apart. Aggression, extremism, chaos, and cynicism. A desire to retreat from the world and go it alone. Our task, our test, is to make sure that the forces holding us together are stronger than those that are pulling us apart. That the principles of partnership that we came here each year to uphold can withstand the challenges. That the center holds once again. My fellow leaders, I truly believe we're at another inflection point in world history, where the choices we make today will determine our future for decades to come. Will we stand behind the principles that unite us? Will we stand firm against aggression? Will we end the conflicts that are raging today? Will we take on global challenges like climate change, hunger, and disease? Will we plan now for the opportunities and risk of a revolutionary new technologies? I want to talk today about each of these decisions and the actions, in my view, we must take. To start, each of us in this body has made a commitment to the principles of the UN Charter to stand up against aggression. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we could have stood by and merely protested. But Vice President Harris and I understood that that was an assault on everything this institution was supposed to stand for. And so, in my direction, America stepped into the breach, providing massive security and economic and humanitarian assistance. Our NATO allies and partners in 50-plus nations stood up as well. But most importantly, the Ukrainian people stood up. I asked the people of this chamber to stand up for them. The good news is Putin's war has failed and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with 2 new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. The world now has another choice to make. Will we sustain our support to help Ukraine win this war and preserve its freedom, or walk away and let aggression be renewed and a nation be destroyed? I know my answer. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away. And we will not let up on our support for Ukraine, not until Ukraine wins a just and durable peace in the UN Charter. We also need to uphold our principles as we seek to responsibly manage the competition with China so it does not veer into conflict. We stand ready to cooperate on urgent challenges for the good of our people and the people everywhere. We recently resumed cooperation with China to stop the flow of deadly synthetic narcotics. I appreciate the collaboration. It matters for the people of my country and many others around the world. On matters of conviction, the United States is unabashed, pushing back against unfair economic competition, against military coercion of other nations in the South China Sea, and maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits, and protecting our most advanced technologies so they cannot be used against us or any of our partners. At the same time, we're going to continue to strengthen our network of alliances and partnerships across the Indo-Pacific. These partnerships are not against any nation. They're building blocks for a free, open, secure, and peaceful Indo-Pacific. We're also working to bring greater measure of peace and stability to the Middle East. The world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. Thousands of armed Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, slaughtering and massacring more than 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, in their homes and at a music festival. Despicable acts of sexual violence, 250 innocents taken hostage. I've met with the families of those hostages. I've grieved with them. They're going through hell. Innocent civilians in Gaza are also going through hell. Thousands and thousands killed, including aid workers. Too many families dislocated, crowding into tents, facing a dire humanitarian situation. They did not ask for this war that Hamas started. I put forward with Qatar and Egypt a ceasefire and hostage deal. It's been endorsed by the UN Security Council. Now is the time for the parties to finalize its terms, bring the hostages home, and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war. On October 7th, since October 7th, we've also been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve. As we look ahead, we must also address the rise of violence against innocent Palestinians on the West Bank and set the conditions for a better future, including a two-state solution where the world where Israel enjoys security and peace and full recognition and normalized relations with all its neighbors, where Palestinians live in security, dignity, and self-determination in a state of their own. Progress toward peace will put us in a stronger position to deal with the ongoing threat posed by Iran. Together we must deny oxygen to its terrorist proxies, which have called for more October 7th and ensure that Iran will never, ever obtain a nuclear weapon. Gaza is not the only conflict that deserves our outrage. In Sudan, a bloody civil war unleashed one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. 8 million on the brink of famine. Hundreds of thousands already there. Atrocities in Darfur and elsewhere. The United States has led the world in providing humanitarian aid to Sudan. And with our partners, we've led diplomatic talks to try to silence the guns and avert a wider famine. The world needs to stop arming the generals, to speak with one voice and tell them, stop tearing your country apart, stop blocking aid to the Sudanese people, end this war now. But people need more than the absence of war. They need a chance to live in dignity. They need to be protected from the ravages of climate change, hunger, and disease. Our administration has invested over $150 billion to make progress and other sustainable development goals. It includes $20 billion for food security, over $50 billion for global health. We've mobilized billions more in private sector investment. We've taken the most ambitious climate action in history. We've moved to rejoin the Paris Agreement on day one. And today, my country is finally on track to cut emissions in half by 2030. On track to honor my pledge to quadruple climate financing to developing nations with $11 billion thus far this year. We've rejoined the World Health Organization, donating nearly 700 million doses of COVID vaccine to 117 countries. We must now move quickly to face Mpox outbreak in Africa. We're prepared to commit $500 million to help African countries prevent and respond to Mpox and to donate 1 million doses of Mpox vaccine now. We call on our partners to match our pledge and make this a billion-dollar commitment to the people of Africa. Beyond the core necessities of food and health, the United States, the G7, and our partners have embarked on an ambitious initiative to mobilize and deliver significant finance to the developing world. We're working to help countries build out their infrastructure, to clean energy transition, to the digital transformation, to lay new economic foundations for a prosperous future. It's called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We've already started to see the fruits of this emerge in Southern Africa and Southeast Asia and in the Americas. We have to keep it going. I want to get things done together. In order to do that, we must build a stronger, more effective, and more inclusive United Nations. The UN needs to adapt and bring new voices and new perspectives. That's why we support reforming and expanding the membership of the UN Security Council. Our UN ambassador just laid out our detailed vision to reflect today's world, not yesterday's. It's time to move forward. The Security Council, like the UN itself, needs to go back to the job of making peace, of brokering deals to end wars and suffering. And to stop the spread of the most dangerous weapons, of stabilizing troubled regions in East Africa, from East Africa to Haiti, to Kenya-led mission that's working alongside the Haitian people to turn the tide. We also have a responsibility to prepare our citizens for the future. We'll see more technological change, I argue, in the next 2 to 10 years we have in the last 50 years. Artificial intelligence is going to change our ways of life, our ways of work, and our ways of war. It could usher in scientific progress at a pace never seen before, and much of it could make our lives better. But AI also brings profound risks, from deep fakes to disinformation, to novel pathogens, to bioweapons. We've worked at home and abroad to define the new norms and standards. This year, we achieved the first ever General Assembly resolution on AI to start developing global rules of the road. We also announced a declaration on the responsible use of AI, joined by 60 countries in this chamber. But let's be honest, this is just the tip of the iceberg, what we need to do to manage this new technology. Nothing is certain about how AI will evolve or how it will be deployed. No one knows all the answers. My fellow leaders, it's with humility I offer two questions. First, how do we as an international community govern AI? As countries and companies race to uncertain frontiers, we need an equally urgent effort to ensure AI's safety, security, and trustworthiness. As AI grows more powerful, it also must grow more responsive to our collective needs and values. Benefits of all must be shared equitably. It should be harnessed to narrow, not deepen, digital divides. Second, will we ensure that AI supports rather than undermines the core principles that human life has value and all humans deserve dignity? We must make certain that the awesome capabilities of AI will be used to uplift and empower everyday people, not to give dictators more powerful shackles on the human spirit. In the years ahead, there may well be no greater test of our leadership than how we deal with AI. Let me close with this. Even as we navigate so much change, one thing must not change. We must never forget who we're here to represent. We, the people. These are the first words of our Constitution, the very idea of America. They inspired the opening words of the UN Charter. I made the preservation of democracy the central cause of my presidency. This summer, I faced a decision whether to seek a second term as president. It was a difficult decision. Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people. It's your people that matter the most. Never forget, we are here to serve the people, not the other way around. Because the future will be won by those who unleash the full potential of their people, to breathe free, to think freely, to innovate, to educate, to live and love openly without fear. That's the soul of democracy. It does not belong to any one country. I've seen it all around the world, and the brave men and women who ended apartheid, brought down the Berlin Wall, fight today for freedom and justice and dignity. We saw it, that universal yearning for rights and freedom in Venezuela, where millions cast their vote for change that hadn't been recognized. But it can't be denied. The world knows the truth. We saw it in Uganda, LGBT activists demanding safety and recognition of their common humanity. We see it in citizens across the world peacefully choosing their future. From Ghana to India to South Korea, nations representing 1/4 of humanity who will hold elections this year alone. It's remarkable, the power of we the people, that makes me more optimistic about the future than I've ever been. since I was first elected to the United States Senate in 1972. Every age faces its challenges. I saw it as a young man. I see it today. But we are stronger than we think. We're stronger together than alone. And what the people call impossible is just an illusion. Nelson Mandela taught us, and I quote, "It always seems impossible until it's done. It always seems impossible until it's done." My fellow leaders, there is nothing that's beyond our capacity if we work together. Let's work together. God bless you all, and may God protect all those who seek peace. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America. May I request representatives to remain seated while we suspend the meeting for 5 minutes before resuming to hear the next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Senhoras e senhores, retomam seus assentos.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. That's disorderly.
Check if the president is ready or not.
Okay. The meeting is resumed. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President of the Republic of Turkey. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Sayın Başkan,
Mr. President, dear heads of states and governments, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, on behalf of myself, my country, and my nation, I greet you with my most heartfelt feelings and respect. I'm honored to have the opportunity to address the United Nations General Assembly once again today. Well, I hope that the 79th General Assembly will be a